Rain Man. A Lamborghini transforms into a Prius? Okay, here we got Rain Man. It is a family drama, very specifically a drama about family, not for family audiences. Kind of like an unlikely Bedfellows road trip, journey of self-discovery. Unlike other road trip movies you might be thinking of, this is much more, it is much less of a getting into fun antics type of road trip film. However, the road does provide certain opportunities when you're traveling for things to go awry. So, it is directed by Barry Levinson, written by Barry Morrow and Ron Bass, and of course we have Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman side by side leading this thing. It was released in 1988, and I will soon get to my comment about the Lamborghini and the Prius and why that's not maybe the best description, but close enough. It is tense, it is moving, it is insightful, and fast. It makes me feel anxious, soft, and sentimental. At least those are my emotions, not my feelings. Those are different. I'm going to lead with someone else's words that are actually on the back of the DVD. If I'm going to use their words, I should know who I'm quoting. I can't find it. Was it on... Oh, there we go. The Hollywood Reporter. Funny, heartbreaking, tender, and complex. I think it is all those things. I think it's a very accurate description. If you're going to give it 4 adjectives, those are phenomenal. Give you a summary of this thing. So, we have Charlie Babbitt, who is played by Tom Cruise. We have Raymond, or Rain Man, which is acted by Dustin Hoffman, who is acted by Dustin Hoffman. So Charlie, again played by Tom Cruise, Charlie's father dies. It's really hard, like, these are things you know. I'm not spoiling anything right now. We will get into spoilers at the end, but I'll tell you before I do that, as always. Anyway, there's a lot of detail that they give you on the back of the box and in the trailer that is more than I would normally like to give, but in order to give you an accurate summary, I guess I'll just go with what they did. And yeah, it's really hard to, like, sometimes tell you about a story without telling you some of these major elements in the story and what these conflicts are. So, Charlie's father dies, and he finds out he has a brother at the same time. Charlie is an adult man, kind of like trying to be a hotshot car dealer, exotic cars specifically, which will come back into play later. He's focused on finances instead of family. He basically says, I have no family. He's got a partner that doesn't know anything about his past. He's a closed book. You know, that's how he rolls. So he's kind of a callous man. And he finds out he has this brother, and he's just angry about it. He's just angry about it, and he kind of is using his brother as a pawn. Because he's also angry about other things that have happened upon his father's death that he's found out. So, I guess that is the basis of the setup that we have here. Now, any summary or the back of the DVD or trailers will tell you that Charlie's brother, Raymond, is autistic, which is just a major thing that we need to take into account for this film. It's a major, major, major thing, especially because we're talking about the 80s here. The late 80s, but the 80s nonetheless, where we've come a long way in talking about autism and that spectrum and what that means, and I think people are way more knowledgeable, like the general public is way more knowledgeable about what that kind of is, or what it could be now, versus back then. And I'll get more into this later on, But yeah, that's kind of our setup. We've got wannabe hotshot exotic car dealer, very focused on finances, not family. His father, who's estranged from him, they don't have a relationship, dies, and then he finds out that he has this autistic brother, and then he uses that knowledge he manages the news of this very poorly. He's already kind of in a weird place because he doesn't think he has emotions about his father. It's obvious that there's some things that have gone unresolved for quite some time, and that's just kind of the bedrock for what ensues afterwards. I will kind of get into those adjectives a bit. It is very tense. You've got a lot of fish out of water type scenarios here, except the extremity is turned up to 10 because there's so much unknown. There's so much room for anything to happen. That's why I mentioned that I was anxious during the film. It is very tense, and anxiety was definitely something I felt a lot because of the amount of unpredictability that there was because of Raymond being autistic in a bunch of these scenarios that you don't know how he's going to act. And you don't have enough of his history to know how he acts in certain situations, right? It is a very moving film. I found that, I've seen it maybe only three times, and it definitely pulls on the heartstrings a bit. I mentioned that it is a family drama, meaning that it is a drama about family, not meant for family audiences, and I will get into that more. I mentioned that it's insightful, but it's also fast, and the pacing of this thing is unlike, I would say, a lot of family dramas that I might think of that come to mind, which is also what makes this thing engaging, is that it's not slowly unfolding all these little layers here and there. It is fast. It doesn't seem unnaturally fast, but we've got this scenario of this road trip, and there's pressure, and time is a factor, and we're learning all these things very quickly, but in a natural way, and it adds to a lot of the conflict. Ultimately, though, I think it is a soft and sentimental piece. At least that's how I feel. Target audience, I would say, if you're down for watching a drama about family that is touching, but it is mature. The one good thing I like about it, too, is that it is not intended for all audiences, that there is mature content here. That thus, it is more realistic, because we're not censoring and filtering out stuff that we don't want certain youths or folks to see or hear. So it is the reality of the situation more in that aspect, that it's not a cleaned up version. Of course, there's things that are omitted here and there. It could be wilder or whatever, but I mean, it is meant for adult audiences, or at least mature audiences that can handle the realities of the scenario and what's happening. And that, I think, adds to it. So it has an 80s vibe too, so if you're into an 80s vibe, but it's not like a corny 80s vibe with like a, after school family special type thing. But it's the 80s, and it feels like the 80s, just not in a corny way. If you want to feel something, I guess. If none of that stuff bothers you, and you really feel just like getting some emotions going, then I would say it's for you, and you should check it out. Importance and function, I think that, interestingly enough, and we'll get into the time capsule element here in a second, but it was my introduction to autism. When I watched this as a kid, I didn't know what autism was. obviously didn't have a full picture of the spectrum, and I learned those things later and later and later in life, and continue to learn those things. But this was my introduction to that word of like autism. So does it have an importance or function? I would say now it could still be a window into what autism can look like for some people, but I imagine that they'll have an introduction to that before they see this film at this point. We're talking, this film's from 1988, and there's, other things that are more prevalent in media right now that someone would, I'm sure, see and latch onto before this. I would place it high on the shelf. I would say that it's a time capsule, but it's still aged decently well enough to tell the story without it being distracting. What I mean by that is that there are things in here that may be a little inaccurate, or obviously use of language and terms that we use and things like that. Some of those things are a little outdated, but not in a way that's incredibly distracting from the message. I think that enough of the depiction of Raymond's specific type of autism, because again, there are thousands or millions, whatever. There's an infinite number of ways that someone's condition can express, and I think that they took some key elements of what someone who is autistic could be like, and Raymond's seems to be an authentic version of what that could be like for somebody. It doesn't seem out to lunch. So, again, it is kind of a time capsule in the fact that there's some stuff that's like, that doesn't seem super great every once in a while. But again, it's 1988, so par for the course at the time. In the context of the culture and time, it was fine, it was acceptable, it was the language they were using, it was how people viewed things and understood them. So I think it does that well, because, again, it stayed relatively accurate, I guess, as it could be, and doesn't take away from the moments that are what the movie is really about, with family and finding family, wrestling with that complex scenario, and that confronting of yourself of what do I do now? I've been handed this knowledge and I need to do something with it. I'm going to get into spoilers now. So, spoilers ensue. I think it's really interesting. So we've got Charlie, who his father was super into cars, and there's this big contention about how he was never allowed to drive the car, and how Raymond, he finds out, did drive the car on the driveway on Saturdays or Sundays or whatever day it was, and all this stuff. And Charlie still has a connection to cars and vehicles, and it's interesting just the choices that have been made, because he's dealing with these exotic cars, these really fast cars, and I wouldn't say he's a runner, but he is somebody who is obviously running from his emotions, and he has unresolved feelings about his family, and so he has distracted himself from dealing with those things and focused on money and trying to attain wealth. And he does authentically have an interest in these vehicles. It's not just the avenue for wealth. But it's a really interesting juxtaposition, because Raymond won't travel on like these busy highways, and he won't fly, and he needs a certain amount of comfort and safety. And at the very end, he's going home on a train, right? And it's just really interesting to see that. And that's kind of where the whole thing, like a Lamborghini transforms into a Prius, is just the fact that, Charlie is changed throughout this. This is a very transformative piece of cinema where we see how someone can change when they are faced with certain challenges, and Charlie does. He gets in touch with himself. Things are very fast-paced. There's a lot of conflict and a lot of opportunity for him, which at first he rails against and fails to come to terms with, and fails to be open to exploring. but he does eventually come around, and he makes the choice that I think is best, and that's for Raymond to go back to, I can't remember the name of the institution that he was at, and despite the fact that Raymond is leaving on a train and Charlie's going to go back to his Ferraris and Porsches and Lamborghinis and stuff, that he is still a changed person in that. Giving his brother back, making that choice, we see that I mean, there's a cliffhanger there of like he rails against that and he says, I'm not going to do it, I'm going to fight, and he thinks that he's very noble in this pursuit, and then he still comes to another conclusion. He's still learning, right? And I think that is somewhat realistic, that he has all these different conflicts and scenarios and problems, and he doesn't make the right decision in so many of them, and then eventually he is able to do that, at least. I think for me that's kind of it. Finding that, I guess for me, family is just a sensitive topic anyway, because I feel like I generally don't have a lot. And also, coincidentally or not, don't find it as super important as picking and choosing the people that are going to be close to me because of what we value and how we act with each other and treat each other versus a lineage that is based on DNA. However, Charlie has this connection with Raymond and decides to pursue it, and he is not in it for the right reasons at first, and then he is a changed person, and he bonds to this family. He was so incredibly selfish in the beginning, and we see that changes. We see his values shift. Again, I think that it's done in a realistic way, and the intensity of the performances is magnificent. I should have brought that up before I got into spoilers. But Dustin Hoffman depicting, Raymond here is, I mean, now in the context of whatever, I'm not even going to get into that. But Dustin Hoffman's depiction of Raymond and how he plays him, it brings a lot of intensity to the screen, to the story. It's what we need. It is part of that edge and that fast-paced and that unpredictability and those things that move like a family drama along a lot. Rain Man, 1988, family drama, Tom Cruise, Dustin Hoffman, emotional, tense, gives you opportunity to reassess your own family values. Rain Man.